Howdy folks, Craig here. This episode we have Robert Singer revealing all the secrets on how to play the Arcanist master Rasputina in the December crew. He also exposes how to effectively play against them. But before we jump in, our friends at Gadzooks Gaming have a sweet offer for all our US and Canadian listeners. Gadzooks Gaming has always been a big supporter of the Third Floor and games like Malifaux, Wild West Exodus, Dark Age, Frostgraven Legion. But what makes them my favorite online retailer is their customer service and their amazing custom terrain and accessories. They're giving all of our North American listeners free shipping if you spend $100 or more and then enter in the promo code Third Floor. That's spelled out one word, THIRDFLOOR. Check them out at gadzooksgaming.com. The details are in the show notes. Now on to the episode. Can we kind of talk through models that you're bringing into your crew the vast majority of time when you choose her as your leader?
The things that I think most players are going to find most shocking is that Rasputina has changed dramatically in her play style.
Yeah, that versatility is nice, man, Dave, because you get to decide how you're going to use those pillars if you have to. The number of cards you have is more of a resource now than ever before. But what benefits other than arcing does she get from those pillars? God forbid that you dirty Arcanists have to have a little bit of a hard time winning games.
The Justice is still somebody that worries me as a Rasputina player.
There are few things better than stepping away from the screens, unplugging and sitting around a table to do battle with your friends. Every week, Third Floor Wars brings you the latest strategies, tactics, and reviews on board games, card games, and miniature games like Malifaux. If you want useful information on the games you already play, or new insights on great games other people are playing, you are in the right place. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk broadcast.
Craig here on the Third Floor. Today we're going to do a deep dive into the Arcanist master Rasputina and how she and the December crew work in Malifaux 3rd edition. My guest is Robert Singer, and you may know him from his activity on Weird Place. He's had several games of Raspi under his belt for M3E, and I'm going to pick his brain. So Robert, welcome to the Third Floor. Can you give us some background on you as a player and what brought you into Malifaux?
Yeah, thanks, Craig, for having me. I started playing Malifaux in 2014 during 2nd edition, probably the height of 2nd edition at that point. And I really kind of got into it just because I was at Gen Con. I was looking for another game. I loved skirmish games especially, and found Malifaux. Thought the card mechanic was really cool. Fell in love with the setting, and Rasputina actually was one of my first masters that I picked up. Her and McCabe. So,
no kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and after a while of kind of just playing with a couple of buddies, I wanted to grow the community and became a henchman for Indianapolis and Central Indiana area in 2016.
Very cool. What were you playing before Malifaux? So what kind of what's your ex-girlfriend?
My main ex-girlfriend is Warhammer Fantasy, pre-Age of Sigmar Warhammer Fantasy. So I played that from 5th edition all the way through 8th, and then tried Age of Sigmar and just couldn't hang with it. It was too different, and I'm big on setting as well as competition, and just what they did with the plot. While it was fine, I thought it was interesting, it just didn't grab me like the old Warhammer Fantasy did. So
the best thing that ever happened to Malifaux was the blow up of Fantasy, because I swear that's probably the most popular last game that I played before I got into Malifaux. A very common thing. I never got into Fantasy. I played a lot of 40K, but I kind of regret it now because so many players and people that I talk to that I respect as players came from that world. So I hear it was an excellent game.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that I know who played Malifaux came from a lot of diverse backgrounds. We have a lot of guys in our community who were fantasy players. A few played 40K. I mean, it's kind of hard in minis games to have not come across 40K at some point in your gaming life. But we also have a lot of War Machine and Hordes players or converts from War Machine Hordes. And I think that there is similarities here and there, especially with the ways you can build up combos and things like that. There's definitely a strategic depth to both games that are similar. But I do find Malifaux, and I think most of our other players found it more interesting because you could kind of dive into more, deeper into a faction and more diverse, heroes and characters with a lower model count. And I think that was a big draw for our players.
Well, very cool, my friend. So this is going to be a tough one for me. And not only is it well known that I hate Arcanists, but probably the first master I faced on a regular basis was Rasputina.
Okay.
So my good friend and I, Jimmy, he and I were ex 40K players, getting tired of that, kind of getting tired of playing The Hobbit too. We played a lot of The Hobbit, and I picked up Malifaux and started painting him up and talking to him about it, sucked him in, and basically my first crew was Perdita, and this is early 2E. And he had Rasputina. And this is obviously not news to anybody. I'm terrible. And he's a very good player, a very good competitive player. So probably the first 10 or 12 games of Malifaux I played was me getting crushed by Rasputina over and over again. So I'm going to do my best. Be patient with me as I try to keep my lip bit through this whole thing.
Not a problem. And I can tell you that one of the things that I think most players are going to find most shocking is that Rasputina has changed dramatically in her play style. And I know a lot of players, especially in early beta, were very upset by that. I, for one, having played Raspi for a very long time in 2E, I love the changes, mainly because it is something new and different.
Does it still feel right to you, though? Does it still feel like, she's, got December's curse and from a fluff? Does she feel fluffy?
Yes. I think she actually feels more so now than she did before.
That's good. That's good. My only experience with that so far has been Molly, who is a master that I played that changed drastically.
Yeah.
And I'm like you. I love it. It feels different. It's new. It's still her. So that makes me happy. So let's get more into Rasputina. Can you kind of give us an idea, especially for people that played her in 2E, what kind of style or type of master is she now?
All right. So now she is pretty much a ranged control master, which is really, honestly, very, very different than what she was in 2E. I'm sure, as you know, especially being on the brunt end of it, Raspi could feel kind of oppressive in a really, really, really awful way because she would either completely paralyze your models that you need to, scheme and do what you need to do with, or more often just completely delete models off the board just with her massive blasts. And that play style is actually completely gone from her. She does have a few attack actions that have some blast, but she really is not a primary damage dealer who uses her models as a turret, basically a turret. She is now a full-on range control master who's going to force the opponent into having to make the best of two awful choices.
Oh, that's very cool. So a bit of kind of a control aspect, but at range. And I think what I like hearing about that the most, Robert, is that it makes her not the other side of the Sonya coin.
Yes.
Because I always felt like there were so many similarities between those two masters and play styles and what they did. And, with the last round of upgrades, they try to kind of differentiate them more from each other. But it makes me happy for you dirty Arcanists that Rasputina's kind of got her own feel to it. So let's dig into kind of her main mechanics. So if you're going to talk to us about signature abilities, what are we talking about?
Her signature ability, and I think it's the one that we absolutely need to start with, is Ice Pillars. Ice Pillars are going to be really the crux of everything that Rasputina is going to bring to the rest of her crew. And on her activation, really bring to the table to really try and control what her opponent is doing. So the Ice Pillar action itself is a tactical action that she has. It is, of course, called Ice Pillars. And what it does is it's a ranged stat 6 ability. And the target number is very low on its target number 11. So essentially she needs a 5 to get it off. She has a built-in tome on the action itself as well. And what it does is it creates a height 4 blocking destructible, impassable Ice Pillar marker anywhere within range. The range of the Ice Pillar action is 12. However, that's misleading. And the reason being is that her front of card ability has an ability that will be familiar to most folks who played Rasputina or played against her, called Ice Mirror. And what this does is that instead of her being able to cast through models as it previously allowed, she now casts through Ice Pillar. So once she drops that first pillar within 8 inches of herself, she can actually cast through that pillar because she'll have line of sight with it being height 4 pretty much anywhere on the board. And so that extends her range, at least for the Ice Pillar action, to over 20 inches, probably about 21 inches.
Wow. So, I mean, that first turn, then you're looking at pretty much putting that second Ice Pillar wherever you damn well please.
Yes. And so the interesting thing, too, is that with her Ice Pillar action, so she's got the built-in tome. The target number requires a tome. However, for 2 tomes, she has a trigger called Frozen Domain, which allows, when resolving, create an Ice Pillar marker anywhere within range. So you drop that first marker, and because it's when resolving, you can drop 2 down. And so now you've got 2 in position of kind of where you want them around her. The next action, especially on turn 1, her second action, you're going to try and drop another, and now you can draw line of sight through one of those pillars. So you're getting 2 out in front of you between 8 and 12 inches on turn, the first action. Second action, especially if you have the tome in hand or you want to spend a stone, you end up getting 2 more that are going out as far as 21 inches.
Wow. That's powerful. So can we get an idea, and I'm sure it'll get into it with her crew, but what benefits other than arcing does she get from those pillars? So
the first and most important one is a front of card ability that she has called Harsh Winter, which states that if this model is this crew's leader, any models that start their activation within Aura 1 of it or an Ice Pillar marker must either discard a card or gain slow.
Ooh.
Yes. So essentially, what Rasputina is trying to do on the outset with the Ice Pillars is twofold. One, she's trying to create arc nodes essentially for herself, right, to see across the board, draw a line of sight across the board. Especially that height 4 is very powerful, especially with it being an Ice Pillar marker. What that means is that you can also drop that into concealing terrain, and now you can see out of that concealing dense terrain. So there's a lot of possibilities that you have with these markers to really get around line of sight issues on the table so that she can see wherever she needs to. The secondary function of this, though, becomes forcing, like I said, the opponent to have to make really tough choices, because now they're having to choose when they activate a model. If I drop that marker within 1 inch of 2 or 3 models, those 2 or 3 models are going to have to discard a card or gain slow. So you're either sacrificing an action with them or sacrificing a card in hand. If you've got a hand of all good cards, those are cards that you're not using.
Well, and there's so much more discard requirements in M3E across all factions, and your card hand is restricted. There's now a max card size. So cards were always a resource, right? I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding is that the number of cards you have is more of a resource now than ever before.
Oh, absolutely. And the amount of card draw that you can get in a crew is especially important. And at the onset, especially with now where also you can use cards to cheat initiative. And that even that cheating initiative with certain strategies like Cursed Idols can become very, very important. So there's a lot of reasons why taking cards away from your opponent can be so powerful. And it is something that's nice for the Rasputina player as well, is that she's not going to do or put out as much damage as she used to in a very big way. But what she is going to do, she's going to force that opponent to really have to reckon with making some very difficult choices. And we'll get into it a little bit later why her crew is so good at this, because some folks may be listening and thinking, okay, well, she can max get out 6 pillars a turn. Well, yes, that's true. However, she is not the only way that her crew can get those pillars out there. There's also a lot of ways once the pillars are there with some of her other actions, especially her attack actions, that she can really force or magnify the pain for the opponent to have to start making difficult decisions.
Yeah, and you see the markers are 30 millimeter. You say, oh, it's only within an inch of it. But I mean, when you told me that it wasn't a bonus action, it's a tactical action, which means she can do it 3 times. And now with each time she's doing it, she's potentially putting out 4 markers. I mean, that's insane. And those 30 millimeter markers, because there's other terrain on the board, are gonna gum things up pretty quick. And we didn't have destructible terrain before. That's about the only thing that makes me not immediately get triggered by this entire conversation, is that you can destroy these things. And for those that aren't real familiar with 3E, can we talk through what destroying what kind of action takes that, so that we get an idea? Because I would imagine going up against Raspi, you're going to want to get familiar with how to destroy terrain.
Absolutely. So a destructible terrain trait means that terrain is removable, and it's removable by models or, by models in general. So any model, and this also is very, very important for those who are going to try and attempt to counter Rasputina, is that any model, does not matter if they're significant or insignificant, can still take an action if they are within 1 inch of a piece of destructible terrain to remove that piece of terrain. So the bright side is that your insignificant models, your rats, your hollow waifs, and others who cannot scheme and cannot interact are still able to remove an ice pillar marker and any other type of marker or destructible terrain. But they still are probably going to, if they're starting within 1 inch, they're still going to have to either discard a card or gain slow.
Yep.
So you're still limiting even those models. But I have found, especially in the opponents that I've played against, that some are definitely willing to make that sacrifice on their insignificant model of having them gain slow just to destroy that piece of terrain. Yeah. There are other... Oh, go ahead.
No, I mean, and this starts to get into what you hinted at, Robert, which is, leaving them to have to make 2 bad decisions.
Yep. So yeah, even somebody like an insignificant model such as a rat, who actually for a Hamlin crew has so many other very important things to do outside of just the typical scheming, may have to gain slow because Hamlin's got to hold on to that one important card to be able to destroy that model so that Hamlin or Nyx does not get slow.
Yep. And the key being, like you mentioned, as we get into the crew, we're going to find out these aren't the only way that those pillars are popping up.
Correct.
Talk to me. So we got kind of an idea, maybe even kind of an idea of first turn. Is there any other main strengths that we should keep in mind as we move forward with her?
Sure. So one of the important things for her personally with the ice pillars, aside from the fact that she's going to draw a line of sight through them, especially that'll come into play with pretty much all of her attack actions, and that's pretty much what every action she has on her card other than ice pillars is an attack. Outside of that, she also does have an ability called Ice Shield, which is her only form of defensive tech, which is when this model suffers damage from an enemy attack action, it may remove an ice pillar marker within Aura 2 to reduce that damage down to 0. So unless she's going up against somebody with irreducible damage like Leviticus, she's going to be able to, if in a panic or if something does get super, super close and into her face, you can, and you're usually going to see it coming, you can drop a pillar or 2 right in front of her so that you have those as an extra buffer. And it'll save you some stones as well, because now you're reducing that to 0. It's a surefire thing. You're just taking that one ice pillar off that's there specifically to protect her.
And I would imagine you're going to get double duty out of that, right? So you can put those pillars up close to block lanes to, provide protection, and then use them later if they do get in on you.
Oh, absolutely. And so that's one of the nice things too, is that still, if somebody gets into Raspy, the ice or the harsh winter ability still states that it's not just the ice pillar. It's if somebody starts with an activation within 1 inch of her as well. And so the other nice thing, and I have had this come up in games before, is that if I'm playing into like a Lady Justice or the Vix or something like that, then I'm really, really concerned about all the damage dealing models that they have. I'll drop some pillars right in front of her that, one, are going to block a lot of easy charge lanes for models, but two, even though it's blocking everybody else's line of sight to her, it's not blocking her line of sight to them. And so she now has this wall that she can use to protect herself in multiple ways and other models behind that same wall, and have the ability to basically eschew wounds.
Yeah, that versatility is nice, man, because you get to decide how you're going to use those pillars if you have to.
Exactly.
And they're not just there as a safety net. They have uses beyond that. So I could see that being really, really good. Let's dig a little bit in more to the offensive capabilities. You mentioned there's some attack actions, that she's not the blaster she used to be, but what is she doing offensively?
All right. So I will actually start with her blast attack that she does still have, which is called Winter Strike. It is 12 inches, stat 6, resisted by defense, and essentially it's your typical 3rd edition blast attack, I would say. So it's got a damage of 2, 3 blast, 4 double blast damage. In addition, you push any model that is damaged by the action up to 1 inch in any direction. So there is a little bit of damage that you can do there. The nicer thing, though, is that if she does have that, does get that moderate or severe damage, she's doing ping damage to everybody in a large swath, and all those models she can now push. So for those games and strategies where certain models are trying to get close to a turf marker, or to certain models that you're sniffing out, that they're doing outflank, or they're trying to hold up your forces and that sort of thing, you can use this to push all those models away.
Yeah,
there are.
1 inch push too is one of those things that you read on the card and you go, okay, no big deal. But in a game, you're like, whoa, actually, this matters a lot.
It sure does. And I've had multiple situations in games where just bringing a couple of those models closer or further away from something mattered a great deal. Whether it's pushing them into hazardous terrain or severe terrain, something that then makes it more difficult when they have to leave. Or conversely, I've even done it where it's actually pushed things into the ice golem, and we'll get into later why getting pushed into the ice golem is not a good thing. Okay.
How about any kind of, we talked about her defensive tech. How about her support abilities? Is there anything she's doing to make her crew better?
And actually, sorry, going back real quick. So in addition to Winter Strike, she does have 2 triggers on it that makes the ability very versatile. One is called Chill, and that's on a tome. Most of Rasputina's crew's models are going to have the Chill trigger on one of their attacks. Essentially what it is on a tome, the models damaged by this action gain slow. So again, now you have, in addition to those ice pillars going out, you have another way to get slow out. And in this one, it's an en masse, especially if she gets one of those blast markers. So, and then similar to Rasputina in the past, she does have a mask trigger to take the action again, targeting the same model.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And it sounds to me what little she traded in damage, she's gaining a lot in applying conditions and controlling things. But that makes her different, which I like.
Yeah. And again, that's another action that is, she can have up to a 21-inch range on it because of those ice pillars.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. So let's swing over to support abilities. What is she doing to make her crew better?
Pretty much nothing. There's very little on her as a master that makes her crew better. The only thing that I would say truly from a strategic tech list building aspect as far as trying to counter specific models that Rasputina can do is the fact that she herself is ruthless. So she can ignore terrifying and manipulative models. But otherwise, she really doesn't have a lot outside of Ruthless and her Harsh Winter, which is throwing out that slow from the Ice Pillars. What she more is she is the focal point to throw out the Ice Pillars. That is the main form of support that she's going to do.
That makes sense. Now, so it sounds like she can work somewhat independently, that it's not some of those masters out there that are linchpins to the success of the crew. Have you found yourself hiring her as a master with other leaders?
No.
Okay.
The main reason is that Harsh Winter ability goes away if she is not the leader.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
So I do want to go back real quick to something about attack actions as well, is that she does have a third attack action that is actually really, really important and integral to some of the ways that I play her, and I think that fit the control aspect better. So as good as Winter's Strike is with the 12-inch range and the blast, she also has a 6-inch shockwave that is quite unique. What it is so it's a stat 6, target number 11. Instead of dropping a shockwave marker, the action can actually center itself on an ice pillar marker within range. And if it does so, the action, the models damaged by the action suffer an additional +1 damage. So the shockwave stat line actually, shockwave 1, move 14, damage 1, but becomes damage 2 if it is a ice pillar. They also gain slow and staggered, which is a lot for one shockwave.
There's a lot of efficiency there.
Yes. And so that one's going to have only about a 14-inch range or so, because she's going to, or probably about 15 inches, because she's, even if she casts that through one of her other ice pillars, it can only go onto an ice pillar that's within another 6 inches. But to me, Freeze Over can be one of those abilities that is really going to be sneaky for Rasputina player to use on opponents who are either not thinking about it or not suspecting it. Because with all those other ice pillar markers that are flooding the boards by the end of turn 2, when those models, your opponent's models start having to either discard or gain slow, if they've chosen to discard to not gain slow, you start dropping those shockwaves where now multiple models are going to have to, again, test. Mm-hmm. And if they fail that not easy move 14 duel, they're now taking 2 damage, gaining slow, and staggered, which is really, really, really going to hinder them from moving around the board.
Yeah, that's a big deal. You've likely done some damage to their hand already. And for most models, that's going to be, a 9 or better. Which, oh boy, I like it, man. A lot of tough decisions. You're keeping your promise from the beginning. Is you're constantly forcing them into tough decisions, and you're the one that's controlling when those decisions pop, which I like as well. Because if I'm up against Rasputina and she hasn't activated yet, and I'm activating next to a pillar, do I discard? Is she going to come in here and hit me with a shockwave? Do I say? There's a lot of decisions that have to be made.
Yes, and I like to think of her a little bit as an avalanche, which I think is also apropos for the ice theme. But the way that she and her crew can interact with one another to force the opponent to have to start making those decisions. And at first it's tiny ones here and there, but they build up and up and up and up, especially the more ice pillars begin to flood the board.
I think the big thing is you're in so much control as the Raspi player, yes. And your ability to dictate this. I could see that being in the right hands, especially being potentially devastating. So I get the avalanche.
So yeah, and she does also, if she does get locked into melee, which I don't suggest, she does have a 0-inch melee attack. This one does also hand out slow, but it's relatively low damage. There is a built-in trigger, though, that pushes models away from her. So she always has these little ways to push models around here and there.
Yep, and that harkens a little bit back to Tui, and her ability that if she does get locked in, she wants to get out, and the ability to mitigate how much damage she's going to take in that process is good. That's very interesting, Robert. I get what you're saying, how she feels more like Raspy. It feels like these new abilities are fluffier. You get more of the cold theme going with all the slow and the pillars and things like that. Very interesting. I'm not looking forward to playing against her. And I haven't faced her yet. And until we talked, I hadn't really looked her over, except right here before the show. So that's very, very interesting. And I think it sounds to me like it allows her to find her place within the Arcanist faction as well. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit too when we talk about the pools and the decisions you're making. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm going to pick Robert's brain about what do we do after Rasputina. So after we pick up Rasputina and her totem, what kind of models is Robert picking as part of his core crew? What is he using for beaters, schemers, and support pieces? We'll be right back. Howdy folks, Craig here. Now if you love gadgets as much as we do, you're going to love the new Third Floor Wars Gadget Bundle from Schooner Labs. Branded with the logo of your favorite podcast, it comes with 2 measuring multi-tools, a compass stepper for those tight and important movements, along with a compact dashboard to track your turn, strat, and scheme scoring along with your soul stones and pass tokens. It is the perfect bundle for anyone who plays Malifaux or just wants to look cool while doing it. The link is in the show notes. Check them out and help support your favorite gaming podcast. So we've got a new and improved Raspy, not your old man's Raspy. And now let's talk a little bit more about the December crew. So Robert, I'm finding as I'm talking to more and more people as we're doing these master deep dives that most are, have a core crew, that it could be 2 models, 3 models. And I've actually talked to some people that are, really bringing, 35, 40 stones as their core. So can we kind of talk through models that you're bringing into your crew the vast majority of time when you choose her as your leader?
Absolutely. So the first, of course, is the Wendigo. The Wendigo as her totem is, I think, one of the more useful totems for a master in the game right now. One of the reasons for that being the fact that he himself, even though he's height 1, he himself can actually count as a living ice pillar marker for Rasputina, specifically just for the ice mirror ability. So you won't get the extra slow stuff and things like that, but an early conduit for her to get some extra range early in the game can be to move him first. And he has a move of 6 inches, so he can really get up there where you need him so that she can drop that first ice pillar marker wherever she needs to, and get that one up early. The other nice thing is that he can still copy Rasputina's actions, as long as it is not a melee action. So any of her sort of casting ranged actions. So a lot of the time I will typically use that, especially in turn 1 and turn 2, to drop another ice pillar marker. And again, he has that full range. Now, the only downside is that he will need a tome because it's not built in, and he's casting that at a stat 4. So it's a little bit harder to get off, but if you've got the cards in hand, it shouldn't be too difficult to get that extra one there, and it's always worth flipping for.
I'm going to see a lot of pillars going into turn 2, it sounds like.
Yes. Well, and that leads me to the model that even though it's a minion, I start with this for any Rasputina crew because they're just so good for what they do, and especially in a Rasputina crew, and that is actually the Silent One. So at 6 soulstones, the model itself has a pretty good base stat line of 6 health, 5 move, 5 defense, 5 willpower. Pretty basic, right? But it's the rest of its abilities and how it interacts with the Rasputina crew that make the Silent One so powerful. First of all, their top ability on the front of their card is actually Ice Mirror. They can do the exact same thing as Rasputina. They can draw line of sight through an ice pillar within 8 inches of them. The next thing that's very important is that they have the ability attuned, which means that they can use soul stones. So between those two, you then have a series of actions that make the Silent Ones soar for support in the game. Their attack is an 8-inch attack, stat 5, resist defense. Target suffers 1d4 damage. It's called Ice Blast. And it's got 2 triggers, swift action, do it again on a mask, or mutilate. And the mutilate on a crow is built in, which is when resolving, if the target has slow, it suffers +1 damage, otherwise it gains slow. So essentially with the attack, they now, as a minion, with an ice pillar out there, have a 14-inch range attack where they can, if they hit, automatically give somebody slow if they don't have it, or if they already have slow, which in the Rasputina crew is very likely, end up getting +1 damage to what they're doing. So pretty solid, just basic attack.
Yeah, and I mean, as I'm listening to this, Robert, I don't know if I have enough condition removal in any crew to be able to handle this. So it sounds like a lot of models are going to be slow and stay slow.
Yes. Now, all the typical Malifaux stuff that can happen, bad things happen. So against an opponent with a good hand who's beating it, hot deck, things are going to stop it, but there's going to be enough slow getting out that's going to still make it very difficult for the opponent. Which brings me to their first of their 2 tactical actions that are actual full actions. And that first one is Ice Pillars. So the Silent Ones also can cast Ice Pillars, which is one of the first things I have them do in the first turn, pretty much every game. It gets some extra pillars out before Rasputina even has gotten the opportunity to get hers out, thus allowing Rasputina on her turn, and I will usually activate her a little bit later, to then have her choice of models within that 21-inch bubble, essentially, to spread her pillars around. So the Silent Ones on turn 1 are going to do a lot of the setup for Rasputina later in the turn. But that can continue throughout the game. So as you said, you're going to end up seeing a lot of ice pillar markers. Now, Fortunately for the opponent, there are no triggers on this particular ice pillar action. So they're one and done each time. The next tactical ability, and this is where Silent Ones to me become a must take in a Rasputina crew, is the fact that they have an 8-inch heal called Healing Energy. So status 6, target number 12, heals 1, 2, 3, and there is a tome trigger healing burst where models within pulse 2 of the target also heal 1.
How many stones were these things? 6 stones?
They are 6 stones.
Wow.
So no real defensive tech to speak of. Defense 5, 6 HP. So they're going to get chewed through a little bit. But you're going to have difficulty sometimes getting to them if you're slow, or if you have a lot of models slow, because they've got that range. But once you get to them, you're going to probably cut through them like tissue paper, unless the Rasputina player is really, really hanging on for a scheme or strategy to keep that individual alive.
Your positioning and where you put those I think would be extremely important.
Yes, and there is some extra mobility in a December crew, even though a lot of the models inherently are move 4 or 5. There is some extra mobility that we'll get to. So that's something that I try in turn 1 as well, is to try and move them up the board a little bit where I can, and then just get them dropping pillars, because they don't need to usually heal on that first turn. The healing will come in to play more prominently with some of the other members of the crew. So they also have a bonus action that's range 2, targets corpse markers, and it heals them 1, 2, 4. It's called Grim Feast. A lot of the living December models, so Silent Ones, December Acolytes, Horcats, have this ability. Again, that's one of those things that feels very much in theme for them, that so many of the December acolytes, the members of the cult of December, are essentially cannibals. And so this is one of those fun allusions to that does have a practical use, especially if you're playing against rezzers.
Right, who are dropping corpse markers left and right and need them out there.
Exactly.
Very cool. Who's doing damage for you?
So my big beater is going to be the Ice Golem. The Ice Golem is, I think, one of the best bargains for a beater that Arcanists have. And Arcanists have a lot of really great options, but to me, the Ice Golem is kind of stands alone, separate from the rest, especially if he is in a Rasputina crew. I'm very high on the Ice Golem because throughout 2E, you almost never saw him at all. Part of that was the fact that he had a defensive 2. So he was very easy to take down, and he was too expensive for what he does. Fortunately, we don't have as silly stats like that, especially for important, expensive Enforcer models like the Ice Golem. So he's got a 9 health, a move of 4, so he's still a little bit slow. But his defense is back up to 4. And he does have armor 2, which is always comes in handy. Definitely have to be careful of anti-armor models and anti-armor tech. But he does have a lot of ways to get up into the thick of combat. And we'll talk about this other model in a little bit, which is Snowstorm, which is Rasputina's henchman. But Snowstorm has ways to push and get extra movement out of the December models. So Ice Golem is actually going to be able to get up into the center of the board where you need him fairly quickly with some good play and some good tactical maneuvering as well as target selection. He has Flurry. He has an ability called Frozen Club, which is while within Aura 2 of an Ice Pillar, his melee actions receive a plus ram to their duels, which will be very important because his actual melee ability, called Huge Fist, is a 1-inch melee, stat 6, resist defense, target suffers 3/4/6 damage. The ram trigger is Frozen Smash. When resolving, the target suffers +1 damage or +2 if it has slow.
Oh.
Which is potential 5 minimum damage if he's attacking a slow model.
I think that's the first time I've come across that so far in 3E. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's rough. I've had it only go off a couple times. Usually, as the players, as your meta starts to evolve and get used to certain things, a lot of my players have realized, if I'm going to take slow off of a model, it's got to be the one that's on the ice, that's going to be in combat with the Ice Golem, because I don't want it to just die immediately. He does also have the chill trigger, so he can throw out slow. But that's his main bread and butter attack. That's what he does, is you want to get him up in there and really just start smashing face as quickly as possible. He also benefits from Ice Pillars being around because he has a 4-inch pulse bonus action called Reform from Ice. Which is he can remove any number of Ice Pillar markers within range, and he heals 2 for each pillar marker removed. So he has a built-in extra heal there. So if something gets pushed into him, or if he charges something and he's still near some Ice Pillar markers, he's going to be able to, get 3 actions off of attacks, and then whatever hits him back, next turn, if he's still up, but still not looking great, he can do that Reform from Ice action or bonus action and take some wounds back by himself.
And I like that the Raspi player has to make that decision. Do I keep those pillars for the damage, or do I save his rear end? Yeah. So there's some balance there, which I like. How often is he seeing turn 5?
I've not lost him in a game yet.
Yeah. That's what I was afraid of.
Now, the reason being, though, is not just because of that. The reason being is because I like to, a lot of the time, if I'm taking him into a crew, and I usually take him, even if it's a more scheme-oriented crew, just because he is such a distraction that the opponent has to deal with, on top of all the slow and card manipulation that's going on. He's something that they have to deal with if I send him into something. So I like to take him, and if I do, I'm ending up taking 2 of the silent ones, and so they're also able to just heal him back up to full if I need them to. And if I have the cards in hand to make it all happen and get to the maximum of what I need. But generally, I've been able to keep him up in most games. Now, he will get cut down pretty hard from anti-armor with that defense 4, and if something ignores armor. So especially ranged attacks that are going to ignore armor can really, really hurt him and mess up his day. But he, again, benefits from the fact that if he's behind an ice pillar marker, even though he's on a 50 mil, it's height 4, it's blocking, so he's going to be getting that cover.
Yeah, that's good. And yeah. And it sounds like I'm starting getting a sense that there's a little bit of pressure on Raspy's hand because there's a lot of stuff that she can do and her crew wants to do, and you only have so many cards. So I'm starting to get a sense that you're having to be very smart about your decision making.
Yes, you have to, as the Raspy player, you are pretty much starved for cards the vast majority of time. And I can tell you right now, so I usually get really garbage hands, especially for some reason, just turns 1 through 3. I end up getting really bad hands. So I don't end up seeing any good cards until turn 4. So it's forced me as a player a lot of the time to really think about like the tactics and like when I'm going to use those cards, especially if I get a good 1 or 2 in hand, because it is so rare. But yeah, what I did discover, and this was all throughout beta and well into now, was that she was always starved for cards, and I really, really had to be careful about where I wanted to use those. And especially on turn 1, where I truly wanted to use those cards, was on getting the ice pillar markers out. After that, once you have a good baseline of that, then you can start to be a little bit more flexible. But turn 1, you really, really, really need to get them out, and you need to get them out into strategic places that are either going to disrupt your opponent or set you up for the next turn to start disrupting your opponent.
And that's going to make it a little tough because of that pressure. I would imagine it makes it a little tough for you to use turn 1 to curate your turn 2 hand.
Exactly. And so one thing that does help is I always take magical training on at least one of the silent ones. This also gives them some extra defensive tech, especially the counter spell and the shielded +1. But the main reason I take it, like most Arcanist players, is for the arcane reservoir, so that I can have a 7-card hand.
And obviously, because you're taking it, it's worth the 2 stones.
Oh, absolutely. Every time.
Who's dropping scheme markers? Who's getting to turf markers? Who's running your schemes?
So it really depends on the scheme. But the 2 big scheme runners are going to be Blessed of December and Blessed of December and the Ice Dancer. Are the 2 big scheme runners. They're fast, they're mobile, they do enough different things that you can justify taking them, especially in a very scheme marker heavy or mobility scheme encounter. You can justify taking both of them. So the Blessed of December is an enforcer, so you can only take 1. She has 8 health, 5 move. She has an awesome defense of 6. And a willpower of 5. So she has a little bit more of that defensive capability that's sometimes lacking in a Rasputina crew, especially coupled with the fact that she has hard to wound. So she can be kind of a beast to have to deal with if you're going to really try and take her out. Her mobility begins with the fact that she has deadly pursuit. So during the end phase, she can push 4 inches. She also has, and this is the most important aspect of her for really getting around, is that she has leap. So on a 6, she can place anywhere within 6 inches. And that really helps, especially for getting across the board to where you need her. So for Search the Ruins, for Breakthrough, for Outflank, that sort of thing.
Is the suit built in for that leap?
Suit is built in for that leap.
That's big.
So,
that's big.
Yeah. So, but again, it's another instance where if I don't flip that, 6 and I really, really need it, now I've got to spend a card in my hand, and that's still a card that I might need for an Ice Pillar later on, or one of the Shockwaves. So there is definitely still pressure on the Tina player to really make some of those hard choices as well. But again, that's something that to me fits in with the fluff and flavor of the characters, that Rasputina is always in this constant struggle of making hard decisions for herself and for the cult and her place in the world, and that struggle with December. So
Well, and God forbid that you dirty Arcanists have to have a little bit of a hard time winning games. So
yeah. So speaking of hard times, the Blessed of December also has a pretty vicious attack called Ferocious Claws. It's range of 1 melee, stat 6 resist defense, and target suffers 246 damage and then gets pushed up to 2 inches in any direction. There's a whopping 3 different triggers for this. So critical strike for the +1 damage on a ram, pouncing strike, which can sometimes be one of my absolute favorites with her, which is on a mask. You place the Blessed in base contact with another enemy within 5 inches in line of sight, and then take the action again, targeting that enemy model. And then on another mask, a separate mask, Onslaught, so she can just take it again against the same target model. So she has a lot of options if she does need to attack something, especially she can be a good enemy scheme runner hunter. She can go and kill a model very easily, especially a minion for Reckoning. So she has a lot of different versatile uses, and I pretty much take a Blessed in any Rasputina crew.
Between her and the Ice Golem, that's 2 models that we didn't see much of in 2E, so I'm glad they've got some new life.
Yeah, and honestly, the only time you would ever see Blessed was really not as Blessed. You would see it as Miranda turning into the Blessed in Rasputina crews, especially for something like Undercover Entourage. So you really never saw it even hired into the crew. The only way you'd see it on the table is if an out-of-faction model was taken first.
That makes sense. Now, does that pretty much build up your core as far as the December models?
So my core, I would say, is the aforementioned Blessed, the Silent Ones. However, there is one that's in the Ice Golem, but there is one that's missing, and that is Snowstorm, and that's Rasputina's henchman. Snowstorm is one that I don't think is 100% necessary in every encounter. However, it is one that I do like to take in most, and that's because it's essentially another Blessed of December, except that instead of getting the extra movement itself, it's giving extra movement out to everybody else. So it has a very similar stat line of 9 health, move 5, defense 6, willpower 5. However, it provides a little bit more buff for the rest of the crew, especially early on in the game. She has Mill of the Storm, which is when a friendly model within Aura 3 suffers damage from shoot actions. You reduce the damage by 2. She also has Charge Through, and she has the same exact attack as the Blessed of December. So Charge Through essentially means that when she takes the melee actions that are generated by Charge, she gets a plus to the damage flip. So that 2, 4, 6 damage, even though the low end is 2, you're probably going to get closer to that 4 with that plus to the damage flip, even if you're, maybe on a negative initially from the differential between the dual total. The model also has a truly important mobility action. It's technically an attack, but it can be used by the rest of the December crew essentially as a tactical action instead. So what it is it's a shoot range 8, stat 6, target number 12 shockwave. And it's shockwave 2, so it's got a much bigger radius, 2-inch radius instead around that shockwave marker. Move 13, damage 2. Now, as a whole, that's a really good, just basic damaging shockwave to throw out at the enemy, right? However, when you resolve, any friendly December model may ignore the effects of the action and instead push up to 3 inches in any direction.
Nice.
So you don't even have to, you can renege with the December models and just let them get pushed, while enemy models, especially if you got a big morass right in the middle of the center of the board or something like that, you can start damaging your opponents and pushing your other models. But early game, you're using that to push up all of your December models. So usually I'm going to move with Snowstorm, then drop Ice Tornado behind him so that it pushes all of my December models up an extra 3 inches. Sometimes I'll even, so there's a ram trigger called Cataclysm, which allows a second shockwave marker to be dropped within range and line of sight. So sometimes if I've got that ram in hand, if it's a 6 of rams or higher, I can drop that down and then affect almost the entire crew and get them that extra 3-inch push, which for several of those models, especially Rasputina and the Silent Ones, and definitely the Ice Golem, that's a big deal of getting them further up the board. Finally, he's got a bonus action that's really, really important called December's Command. So it's a 6-inch range, stat 6, target number 10. And you target another friendly model with Demise Frozen Heart. We haven't gotten too much into that, but there are a few models in Rasputina's crew that have Demise Frozen Heart, which means that when the model dies, they drop an Ice Pillar marker in base contact. So when you target a Demise Frozen Heart model, which is essentially only a handful of her crew, it's really not any of your living models like the Silent One or the December Acolytes or the Horcats, but it's more your Ice Gammon, your Ice Golem. So when you target one of those models, you push that target up to its move in any direction. So that's where the Ice Golem is now getting his extra movement from, is that he can end up getting an Ice Tornado that pushes him 3 inches, and then December's Command that pushes him another 4 inches. Now he's pushed 7 inches. So if you want to get him close to the center of the board or elsewhere, he's gotten 7 free inches of movement before his turn even starts, where then now if he does decide to walk or charge, now he's gotten up there a little bit more, and so he's more akin to other models that he can actually get somewhere with about 11 inches, 12 inches of range.
And with all those pushes, it's going to make it hard to lock him down, it sounds like, too. So, yes. If my game plan is to tie up the guy for at least 1 or 2 activations, it might be harder to do.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so the Snowstorm is one of those pieces that I find as a really nice utility piece. I'm not always going to take him, but I am definitely going to take him when I know I'm taking the Ice Golem, just because it is such a important mobility piece. And the aura from Middle of the Storm to protect against shooting actions and things like that really is just the extra protection he needs as an escort. Plus, as a henchman, you can use Soulstone, so there is some extra benefit there. If I really need something to go off or something like that, I have that extra reassurances there from that.
How about Ice Gammon? Are you hiring those?
We can get into it a little bit later, but there's really only one type of list I take where I'll take Ice Gammon, and that's when I have Sandeep as a second master.
Got it. Well, that leads me to my next question. How often is that happening? Who are you hiring, and when do you hire them?
All right. So are you asking specifically second masters, or just kind
Correct.
Of filling out the rest of the
second masters?
So for second masters, number one, I will say that Sandeep, I think, has some of the most fun, not necessarily always the most competitive, but some of the most fun interactions with a Rasputina crew, specifically because Sandeep can do his summoning of elementals, specifically Gammon.
Right.
What I like to do sometimes to save some stones, even though Sandeep himself costs 16 stones, what I will like to do sometimes in a list with him is I'll take Rasputina, I'll take my Silent Ones, and I'll take the Blessed of December, for instance, but then I'll take 2 Ice Gammon and Sandeep. And the reason I do that is that when Sandeep summons a Gammon on their shackled elemental upgrade card that they get, there is a small addendum, a little bottom portion of the ability that for some Gammon you're going to completely ignore, but for the Ice, Fire, and Metal Gammon is very important, which is that if that summoned model is within, I believe it's 4 inches of 2 other Gammon of the same type with the same demise ability. So Ice Gammon with Ice Gammon, Fire Gammon with Fire Gammon. Mm-hmm. At the start of that specific model's activation, the 3 of them can replace with a Enforcer with the same demise ability. So the Ice Gammon.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yes. So it does take the action. Sometimes it might take a soul stone, but you're saving 2 stones at any rate with just not paying the full 10 for the ice golem. Now, the reason I like it is because there is kind of a super, super tricksy thing you can do. And I've done it both with Rasputina and I've done it with an actual Sandeep crew, which is that when you have a model that was selected for a strategy or scheme, everything about that model stays the same for that strategy or scheme and transfers over into the replaced model. Yep. So sometimes I will take a Ice Gammon for Vendetta, but then he'll turn into the Enforcer, but he still counts as cost 4 for Vendetta. So he can then go into something else and kill it or get the damage on it and still score those points because he started out as that 4 Soulstone Ice Gammon.
Right, and he's going to be a lot more effective scoring that as a golem, yeah.
Yeah, so there is a lot of setup with that. It's not always going to work. But Sandeep also has essentially an elemental prompt, if you will. He does have an action that allows him to target any elemental, and they get to do a non-bonus action that either doesn't throw on an upgrade, does not mention the model by name. Right. So you can actually end up, once you have that Ice Golem out there, you can actually get 4 attacks in a round with that Ice Golem if you need to, between Flurry and Sandeep prompting him. And Sandeep himself is pretty good. He's got, some ranged attacks. He definitely is better leading his own crew. But there are reasons that you can take him. Another thing that I'll do with the Rasputina crew, if I have Sandeep in there, is that I'll summon Wind Gammon, just because they're just excellent leaping schemers. When they die, they can also, any model within 8 inches, they can choose that model and place them within 4 inches of where they were. So there are some fun little things you can do with them. But Sandeep is going to be a little bit more limited because there is a restriction that his upgrade they throw on the elementals, it's only plentiful 2 when he's not the lead.
Okay. Got it.
So it won't get completely broken and that sort of thing, but it is fun.
That's good. That's good.
So the other master the other master that I would take is just because she's good is Colette. Again, Colette is nice because she can do a lot of that extra scheming that sometimes if I want to take, Blessed December and I want to take the Ice Golem, but I don't necessarily want to take Snowstorm, I might shell out the extra Soul Stones for Colette, who's going to scheme pretty much better than most things in the game, and she's going to be able to push models around and place them around with Presto Changeo, which can be an incredibly powerful ability just on its own, but especially when you have a scary beater like the Ice Golem, you can really, really do some significant damage with that. We didn't go into them too much, but Ice Dancers are also dual performer and December models. They are very good, don't mind me type scheme runners with a fast ability. And they also have great synergy with the Ice Pillars because they can actually push 8 inches towards a Ice Pillar with one of their actions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they have a lot of mobility that the rest of the crew outside of the Wendigo, outside the Wendigo and the Blessed December lack, the Ice Dancers have. But they'll have great synergy, again, with Colette, so that if I send an Ice Dancer somewhere and, into an enemy model and I drop a scheme marker, but then I decide to Presto Changeo with Colette, there's just a lot of different interactions that can happen that can be really, really interesting, including sending a model that hasn't activated yet right into 3 or 4 Ice Pillars. Mm-hmm. And getting them on that trap that even if they discard a card for the one Ice Pillar, they're still kind of screwed by the others, or even if they remove one of the Ice Pillars.
Yeah, I mean, because if I'm on top of 2 Ice Pillars, discarding 1 card does me no good. I'm going to have to discard 2.
Yes. As far as, and they haven't fully gone into that. That has been essentially the assumption, for most of the players, at least in my meta, and as far as I've seen with most battle reports and things like that, because the ability essentially says is that if this model is crew's leader, enemy models that start their activation within or one of it or an ice pillar marker must either discard a card or gain slow. So if you got 2 or 3 out there and one gets destroyed, you still have got 2. They're going to have to discard and get that slow. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to get 2 slow. You can't get slow twice. So if you decide to take the slow, you're not discarding any cards. If you decide to discard just 1 card, you're good. But having more and more out there just increases the likelihood, and especially having more around large groups of model makes it even more difficult for them to have to reckon with it.
Now, Robert, I've been talking to a lot of competitive players here and over in the UK, and one thing that I'm hearing, and I want to know if you are finding this yourself, is that they really enjoy hiring another master, but they're telling me that it's more fun than it is competitive. Are you finding that to be true with Raspy or just in general?
With Rasputina, absolutely. I think that she excels better on her own, and really more than most other, even Arcanist masters, I think that she really excels by just having December-only models. There are a handful of out-of-keyword models that I will sometimes take with her if the encounter dictates the necessity for it. But overall, in 3rd edition, I do think that a second master is not going to be the most competitive. I do think that for certain masters, because they are so good and utilitarian, that they can bring so much by being a second character that has 3, but technically 4 with their bonus actions. Bringing that to bear can be powerful depending on the master. So I think Colette, as a second master into any crew, is going to be incredibly powerful in an Arcanist game. And so really finding the right spot for her to be there. I think that a good competitive player will still be able to get work done and win some games in a competitive environment with her. And across other factions, I do think that there are a handful of masters that are powerful enough because they don't have to necessarily worry about supporting the rest of their crew. They're going to do their thing and they're going to do it really well. So like Lady Justice and Misaki are 2 others that come to mind from Guild and Ten Thunders respectively. You can throw them into other Guild crews or other Ten Thunders crews, and they're going to have an impact on the game. I don't think you're going to win every game with those masters if you're doubling up, but they are going to have a powerful impact. I think probably more than anybody, Lady Justice probably will.
Yeah, and they just recently, I think in the last update of the open beta, they upped her price as a result because I think they were seeing that more and more. It'll be very interesting whether Kyle and Matt can find that sweet spot because in my mind, if they can get it to everybody who is a casual player playing a casual game is going to do it because it's cool and fun, but it doesn't dominate and take over the competitive meta. If they can find that balance, it'll be pretty impressive.
Yeah, I agree. I will say I have, probably in the last 2 months or so, I've seen more of our players experiment with 2 masters, and that's been really fun to see. Somebody most recently in one of the tournaments I ran, I had to play as the ringer, and he was playing actually Yuko, the new Ten Thunders master, because he just picked her up at Adepticon, and he actually took Misaki as an extra master, and it was honestly very, very effective. We ended up having a close game. I played as McCabe in that one, and we ended up having a very close game. But Misaki definitely had an effect on it because he really could just have her run an entire flank by herself because she could go wherever she wanted. And she could drop the schemes and do what needed to be done. And he had breakthrough and search the ruins and things like that going on in the scheme pool. And so he really was able to use her effectively. And it was really only through some trickiness here and there with McCabe that I was able to pull out just a one soul stone or 1 point lead in the end. But that was one of those marriages between 2 masters that actually really terrified me because of some of the stuff the synergies that they had, but also the fact that Misaki is just really good on her own.
Is there any, Robert, out of keyword or versatile models that are making it into your December crew?
Yeah, once in a while. So one that I really like to take, and it's not going to be all the time, but it will be very situational, is that if it is a very, very, very scheme marker heavy pool, and if I'm going up against somebody like Colette or Parker or something like that, the Saboteur, I think, as a versatile model, has a lot to offer between it being disguised, which means that, can't resolve the attack actions from charge. Don't Mind Me, which means they can still interact while engaged. And then its attack, Arson, which is a shockwave that removes an enemy scheme marker. So especially that ranged scheme marker removal is really nice. And the bonus action also, Sabotage Their Plans, is you target the enemy scheme marker and you remove it, and then you drop one of your own in base contact. So the Saboteur I like. The Soulstone Miner, I think, for any Arcanist player is one that's going to be good and have its uses. As a versatile 6-stone model, it's got, some really good defenses. It's got a bury mechanic that can, shunt it across the board if needed for something like Breakthrough or Search of the Ruins and things like that. And also it's got a really great ability to literally do what it says and mine soulstones for you, because it can take stunned at the start of its activation, which means unfortunately can't take bonus actions. And since it's a model that can only take the interact action as a bonus action, it means it's not interacting that turn, but you're gaining some soulstones from stunning that model.
Yeah.
So if you're running low and you need them, it's a good model to take. I love the Windgammon in general. Even at 7 soulstones, it's going to really get a lot done, especially being a leaper and hiding it behind terrain. And the Mech Arachnid as well. If you need something that is anti-armor, which there is really not a lot of in a Rasputina crew, it's going to chew through armor, hard to wound, hard to kill, and can be potentially really mobile if you take the diesel engine upgrade on it. It's also a really good second candidate for magical training, just because the shielded +1 and the counter spell means that you can lock that minion in with a really good melee attack to start killing minions, or even some lightweight to midweight enforcers.
Yeah, and it's got the speed too.
Yeah, it's got the speed to get there. And so those are really the 4 that I would take, but again, they're all situational, and I'd only take them based on the master that I knew I was playing, and as the scheme pool allows. But there really is a lot, even within the Rasputina crew, that still can get a lot done. As much as I was kind of poo-pooing the Ice Gammon earlier, they do have some nice utility aspects to them that can really cause greater exponential damage if used well. It's just that it takes a lot of setup, and sometimes I feel like you just don't have that time in a 3rd edition game to get that setup in. But they do have an excellent bonus action where they can just pretty much put up Freed Shielded onto other December models, which can definitely come in handy. And the December Acolyte, again, is one of those where I'll definitely take it in Reckoning, but I'm not going to take it as often in other things. But and especially the From the Shadows can be useful with certain schemes, but it's not going to be useful all the time because he doesn't have a lot of defensive tech. So, and the Horror Cat, again, has its places as a sneaky scheme runner, but again, not going to be something that I take all the time. But there's enough in a Rasputina crew in that core that I talked about that you have enough room to play with options for a model or two here and there.
It sounds like her and the December crew are in a good place if what you're talking about ends up being true, 6 months from now, that you've got a core crew that you're seeing, pretty common, but you're finding other uses for all the other December models.
Yes. And honestly, one thing that I've done is that I do have 2 sort of core lists that if I'm going into an event, or especially if I have to bring in an event that I run and I don't want to use a ton of different models for each thing, I just build 2 variations of like a Rasputina crew. So one is kind of an all-comers, but definitely one that includes the Ice Golem. So that's 2 silent ones, one with magical training, a Horror Cat, the Ice Golem, Blessed, Snowstorm, Wendigo, Rasputina, and I've got 4 stones left over. So that's the one if I want to have the mobility, beat face, and also have the silent ones to throw up as many pillars or heal the hell out of the Ice Golem. But then I also have my really schemy one, which is Raspy, Wendigo, Blessed, Silent One with Magical Training, second Silent One, 2 Ice Dancers, and Snowstorm. And so that one I'm going to really try and spam as much of the pillars across the board, but use the Ice Dancers to push towards those ice pillars and get as much extra mobility between the Ice Dancers, the Blessed, and Snowstorm as I possibly can. So that one I like to take into things like Breakthrough, Search the Ruins, Deliver a Message, Outflank. It can be really good in as far as schemes, as far as strategies with that list. It's a really good one for plant explosives and for turf war.
That's cool. And that's what we're going to do after the break, Robert. I want to dig more into, how the different strategies are impacting your builds. So let's take a quick break, and I'm going to pick your brain some more. Okay, so now that we understand your crew, Robert, I want to understand, how the pool is impacting your builds. So from the top, can you talk to me about, you go to a tournament, you've got all of your Arcanists with you. What is the 1 or 2 strategies that come up that make you immediately consider, if not pick, Raspy?
I will say the number 1 strategy is turf war. The reason being is that turf war, in its essence, is really about board control, right? And especially if the deployment is standard or flank, I'm going to take Rasputina probably about 85 to 90% of the time if I'm
wow.
And the reason being is that, especially in flank, you're right there by that first marker. You're not too far away from that central marker. And my Blessed December or my Ice Dancer or my Horcat can get over to that third marker on essentially my kind of L of the board very quickly and very easily. So I like to triangulate with those 2 that are right in front of me and the one in the center, and just try and control as much as possible. So I'll throw up ice pillars in front of as many of the strategy markers as I can. The other thing that I like with turf war is the fact that I have, between Blessed of December, Snowstorm, and the Ice Golem, 3 potentially scary beaters who are going to, number 1, the Ice Golem is going to make anybody think twice about trying to get to that center turf marker, especially once I start throwing up pillars that's going to protect it a little bit more from shooting attacks. Usually I'm going to throw the Snowstorm up near, in between the turf marker that is closest to my deployment area and the center marker, again, so that he can be there to support whoever he needs to with either mobility or attacks and, a nice charge. And then that Blessed December, I can just send over and score that marker very quickly, or go and start hunting down others who are going to try and flip markers. And the more models, I kill with any of those 3, I'm flipping those turf markers. Right. So there are schemes as well that I really like, in particular with turf war, that and we can get into that later, that I think are really, really can make the crew shine, because you are providing a lot of control of both the board and really essentially, putting down those ice markers and saying, come at me and try it.
Yeah, those two key pieces, the golem being able to really help you lock down and intimidate that middle, and then the blessed to not only get that left or right hand marker down, but also to immediately then go on offense and play zone, make sure nobody gets past her, and then push into that table corridor. That makes a lot of sense to me. How about plant explosives? Do you find using Raspi with that?
Yeah, and that second list that I mentioned, the very schemy list where I take 2 Ice Dancers, the Blessed, that's the one where Plant Explosives, I think, can shine. Again, because the extra mobility that I'm even getting out of Snowstorm, because that Shockwave affects Snowstorm as well, because it's all December models. And so it can get that push as well. And so getting any of them across the board is not very difficult. And the fact that, again, the Ice Dancers both have Don't Mind Me. So even if somebody locks them down, I can potentially, towards the end of a turn, score for those explosives. And so there is, again, that cumulative effect, especially as I'm starting to slow everybody else down, really try and block areas, especially if there's a lot of terrain density near the center of the board. I can also try and strategically throw up as many markers as I can to funnel my opponent into certain areas, which then, again, is going to hinder where they can plant their explosives unless they've got place effects or something like that. So I do like plant explosives. I don't think it is of the 4, it's not in my top 2. For Rasputina, I would say that the other one is probably Reckoning. Even though she's not a very killy master, she has a lot of the ability to, between her attacks, the silent ones, the Blessed, the Ice Golem, enough damage that can get through, and especially if slow is out on models.
Yep.
To get just the right amount of models killed per turn that's necessary for Reckoning. And again, that threat being there constantly with the Ice Golem and with the extra damage that can come, especially like I mentioned, the December Acolytes, I think, are very good ranged-wise because they have the Mutilate trigger as well. So if you start pinging everybody with Mutilate on a model that has slow, you're getting extra damage from every one of your ranged models. Yeah. And that can build up over time and really wreck some 5, 6, 7 health minions or enforcers.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to find this bears out as this edition gets more mature, or at least this set of strategies get more mature and get more play on it. When you read Reckoning, the first thing you think of is obviously damage output and resiliency. But I think one of the secret things out there is mobility, because you need to know where to pick your spots to be able to really get the points as they stack and as you're scoring beyond, and the ability to have the model where you need it to be and not giving your opponent a place to run away or making it at least harder to run away, I think is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. I think that, and the thing that I really like about the strategies in this edition is the fact that, and it's also with the schemes, is the fact that 2E, I think, got stuck in a certain mindset that it was easier to just kill everything and then scheme and score your strats than it was to actually try and scheme and score your strats without engaging your opponent.
Yep.
And what I appreciate about this edition is especially that a lot of the schemes require you to keep several models alive and behoove you to do so. So that the damage output, with the exception of Reckoning and a little bit in Turf War, but mostly in Reckoning, the damage output for most of your other strategies and a lot of your other schemes is really there as a distraction to really put the pressure on your opponent rather than to just table your opponent. That, to me, that Malifaux has always been great because it's not about tabling. It's not about doing the most damage. It's about scoring the points, and scoring the points are through schemes and strategies, and that plays again into the fluff and the flavor of the game. So I've always really appreciated that aspect. And I feel like 3rd edition is doing a better job of that with the strategies and schemes.
I agree. And you couple that, and this is a result of the strats and schemes, every action, it just seems so much more important. I'm not seeing the throwaway actions that I had in 2E. And that's, I think, what a lot of us love about the game is that, you've got a lot of decision points. It's not a light game. And, for a lot of us, that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And, it brings me to, something like Corrupted Idols is one of those that I absolutely love, because it's so silly, fundamentally. You're damaging your models with irreducible damage in order to score, the highest amount of points of any of the other things that you can score in that scenario. You can get a max of 4 from Corrupted Idols, and it just cracks me up when I first read it at Gen Con last year. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
Yep.
Now, there is definitely a random element that can hinder a Rasputina crew a little bit because of depending on which board side. But if Outflank is in the scheme pool and Corrupted Idols is the strategy, I definitely consider Rasputina just because I know I can get models on either flank. And I know that between 2 Silent Ones and Ice Pillars, I've got the range to start healing anybody who's been harmed by moving those idol markers.
And I would imagine Snowstorm would be a consideration in that scenario too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Snowstorm is great for it. And the Blessed of December is another just rock star for it. It is another one that I also... that's one of those where I would also consider, beyond just the Ice Dancers, I would consider taking a Wind Gammon just because of the leap ability.
I think this is another one, again, as this edition gets more mature, I think we're going to see some very interesting Corrupted Idol builds across many factions. Obviously I can't speak to your meta. I don't feel like we've unlocked it yet here in North Carolina. I think we're still finding new ways to come into it. And you hinted at this, Robert, the rest of the pool really changes your approach to Corrupted Idols.
Absolutely. One thing that I've actually been very curious about is the masters and the crews that enjoy and do a lot of irreducible damage. So I'm very curious and honestly very frightened to see what happens when I face off against a Leviticus player who knows what they're doing with Corrupted Idols, because I think that can have devastating effects between me having to have my models take irreducible damage to score, and then as soon as that activation is done, have them take irreducible damage from Leviticus and the rest of his horror show of a crew. Yep.
It'll stack and multiply.
Yes.
I had not thought about that, and that is frightening. So Robert, as we kind of round this out a little bit, and this is allow us to get a little bit deeper into the schemes, can you build your ideal Raspy pool? So you're at a tournament, final table, and what is the pool that makes you pull the December crew out to win?
It would be, so Turf War would be the strategy, and I would say claim jump, search the ruins, deliver message, vendetta, and take prisoner.
And how would you build that? So what's that crew look like?
That crew is going to be very similar to that first crew that I mentioned, where I have Raspy, Wendigo, Blessed, two Silent Ones, one with magical training, and then a Snowstorm, and I'm probably taking a Horcat in that one as well. So that first kind of baseline Rasputina kind of all-comers list is going to do very well, I think, in that pool. So Blessed is my target for using Search the Ruins especially. I think that she's very good at accomplishing this scheme because of the leap. And you couple that with just a couple other models. So Wendigo, another Silent One, or Horcat. I will sometimes, if I'm worried about, depending on who my opponent is and what master they're playing, I might switch one of those Silent Ones out for an Ice Dancer instead, just so that I have some extra mobility or don't mind me to really get Search the Ruins off. But the scheme amongst all of those that I really, really enjoy for Rasputina is actually Claim Jump. And the reason being is that Claim Jump is, I think, coupled with Turf War. If I throw out that Ice Golem and I've got my Ice Pillar markers and I've got Snowstorm up there in support as well, and the Silent Ones further back to heal, I have multiple possibilities of, number one, locking down that turf marker.
Yep.
Daring the opponent to come into that essential ring of death and healing on my crew. And so I will not take the Ice Golem himself as the target for Claim Jump. He's the one I want murdering whatever tries to get within those 4 inches.
Right.
So usually I will take either Snowstorm or I'll take a model that's less expected. So sometimes it'll be a Horcat, sometimes it'll be the Ice Dancer, somebody that I can get moved up quickly, or sometimes it'll honestly be a Silent One that I will, towards the middle end of the game, I'll have the, if I feel safe enough and I feel like everything's protected, I'll have Snowstorm basically just keep pushing and essentially pull or yank one of the Silent Ones all the way up there.
Yep. I could definitely see that.
So Deliver a Message is another one that I would seriously consider. And with that one, that's where I would take out the one of the Silent Ones in place of a Ice Dancer. And I would use probably the Blessed to get the initial message, the first message being delivered on the opponent, because it just requires you engaging them and interacting. And I know that Blessed is going to probably be able to survive long enough with her high defense, her hard to wound, and then leap away the next turn, right? Mm-hmm. And then to do cleanup, once that model's dead or once I've got the corpse marker somewhere, I will do the I will drop or sorry, not the corpse marker. Once I have the Ice Dancer, will come in and basically do the second message where you just have to have it within 2 inches. So even then I'll just send her, I'll charge her in, not even worry about the attack, and then drop a scheme.
And again, it's where this hidden mobility that you have at your disposal in December really makes a big difference.
Absolutely. So Vendetta is one where it's a little risky, but I like having it there because if I am feeling very adventurous, I might take that Sandeep crew, right? And I might try that silly trick. But that, to me, this is that ideal one because, again, also if I see a lower Soulstone model that's really trying to like get some damage in on some of my bigger hitters, I know, okay, that's the model that I want to start targeting, these certain specific models or these lower Soulstone models with my Ice Pillars. And it's especially nice in the Rasputina crew because I have several models who are 6 Soulstones or higher. So I can really tell who the opponent's models might be as a target for Vendetta. So it's a little bit easier for me to deny.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny. One thing that I've noticed too with the keyword system, and this is, I think, a very good thing, is it's a lot harder to solo a master compared to 2E.
Yes.
And to say a multi-round event. It's a lot harder to create an all-comers list because each of these crews are so different. And, and we've talked about it with Raspy and the strategies, and you're hinting at it with some of these schemes. Raspy's good, but not good at everything. And Sandeep's good, but not good at everything. And, that makes me excited. Because I think that's what Malifaux was supposed to be. I think that's the idea behind it is you have these pools and you have these tools and, the all-star list, the soloing, the same list through all the rounds of events. Obviously we're not going to know for another 6 months or a year, but I've got a sneaking suspicion we're going to see that less.
We are. There are a few masters that I think are capable of it. But I think on the whole, we are very fortunate that we really do have a lot of balance between the masters, that masters per faction are going to excel at very specific pools and specific things. Some are going to be better for certain encounters than others. And you are going to have, I think, per faction, 1, maybe 2, who you probably could solo through, but you'd have to diversify a little bit how the crew looks. But that's also good. It's good to have generalist type masters as well, because some folks don't want to collect as much. Some folks, really like just certain characters and are drawn to certain things, or a certain play style just really appeals to them. But I don't think any of them are, so far as I've seen, I don't think any of them are truly broken or unbeatable. And that, I think, has also made it nice, is that we're going to see a lot of diversity. And even areas where we do see folks, doing the same 1 or 2 masters throughout an entire event, you're still going to see diversity in the crew. And that's a good thing.
Well, and, the reality is something's going to pop in the next 6 months or a year that's going to end up being broken. That didn't get caught, right? And what the other thing that's nice compared to 2E is, in 2E, you would focus, all the balance would have to be focused on individual models. So is Sandeep broken? Then we need to fix Sandeep. Whereas, again, this keyword system, and just the more I think about it, the more I see it gets better, is now to balance Raspy, you don't necessarily have to touch Raspy.
Exactly.
Because the keyword system is so important from a cost perspective in hiring to the synergies that are built into it. The designers have a lot more ways to impact balance than just nerfing a model.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think, and honestly, I think that they did a really good job throughout the beta testing as well of really analyzing the cost. And putting even more of a premium on that. The Blessed of December is a perfect example. That thing was 7 soulstones in the beta, in closed beta. And it should not have been. It was so good that it was too good. So when we made the transition into open and it very quickly became 8, I honestly had no problem with it, because it was the type of model that I knew I was going to end up taking no matter what anyway in a December crew. But if it stayed at 7, it was going to be a model that I was going to take into almost any Arcanist crew. And
that's what a great example that is, Robert, of exactly what they're going for there, right? Where they don't want a model that's going to end up in every crew. And because of the way the hiring works now, that 1 stone change kept her in December crews, but made it a lot harder to hire outside. I like it.
Absolutely. So the last scheme that I like in that whole pool is Take Prisoner, just because I have a ton of options with it.
Yep.
So for those unfamiliar with that one specifically, the reveal is definitely different than the end. So the reveal is that at the end of the turn, if I have a friendly model engaging a secretly chosen minion or enforcer, and there are no other friendly enemy models within 4 inches of the secretly chosen model, I can reveal the scheme to gain a point. The end point is if at the end of the game I have a friendly model engaging that model, or after the scheme was revealed, the secretly chosen model was killed by a model which was friendly to it, I gain a VP. The reason I like this one is that it is a very distinct and very clear example of one of those schemes that feels like it's 3rd edition, where the first one is a lot harder to score, but that second one, once you've scored it, is a lot easier to score. So that's another one where the Blessed, the Ice Dancer, or even a Ice Golem that I've thrown all the way across the board with Snowstorm is a good model to try and engage something but keep it alive. And the Ice Golem, I find, is a very good model for that, especially at the center of the board with Turf War going on. And with Claim Jump, I like sometimes pairing Take Prisoner and Claim Jump, because if somebody does get overzealous, I might choose that specific model, or the model that I think might try and send itself over to try and beat on the Ice Golem. So there's a lot of flexibility with Take Prisoner that I really like. And I especially like it because I just have to choose one of your models. I'm not choosing one of mine, and there's no restrictions on which model it is. It's just any of my friendly models.
Well, and I'm going to do a callback here, Robert, because as you're building this ideal pool, do you know the ability that you mentioned that is starting to rise to the top for me a lot is that 1 inch push that Raspy gets off that trigger.
Yep. And that 1-inch push can make all the difference. It can make all the difference in take prisoner.
Yep.
It can make all the difference in claim jump especially. And it can make a huge, huge, huge difference in the strategy itself of turf war. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there is a lot to like in her crew for manipulation, especially of these schemes. I also like it because those are schemes that she's going to be able to excel at. A lot of people also will think, oh, this range slow master is not going to have a lot that can do search the ruins, but really she is. She's going to have a lot of models that can get just across that center line and start popping scheme markers onto her terrain. But it's going to be a lot harder for enemy models to come towards Rasputina's side of the board and be able to accomplish the same thing because she's going to have her eyes everywhere.
I think more than ever, defense can win games now in 3E.
Yes, without a doubt. And I've been seeing it a lot. And it's another reason why that old second edition strategy of, well, I'm just going to murder half of what's on the board and then just do my schemes around it. You just can't do that anymore.
Yep.
And I think that that's a result of multiple things, including the fact that overall there's less singular damage from individual attacks. You have higher defensive tech, especially conditions like armor and shielded and things like that. And in corporal, you see it a lot more across a lot of different models. And so I think that coupled with the fact that a lot of these schemes and strategies really don't encourage as much killing. You, of course, still have your assassinates and your vendettas and those things, and they have a place in the game and they could be really fun. But defense definitely can win games. And I've seen a lot. We've got a player in our meta who has been playing Jackdaw a lot. And even though he's not always winning with Jackdaw, he is making his opponent's life really miserable as they're trying to win with Jackdaw. And it's just because he can do so much ping damage and there's a lot of healing and a lot of like weird interactions and things like that. And he could just really grind things out for the opponent with all the, and again, that feels very in flavor to that, that master of, he's really cursing the opponent and really affecting their hand and doing things like that. So, and one thing I will say is that there is one other scheme that I don't mind seeing in the pool when I play Rasputina, just because I think that you may be able to score one of the points, but it's going to be very difficult to score the second. And so this is more of just kind of a denial thing, is that I don't always mind when assassinates in the pool. I'm not generally going to choose it, but I know it's also one that the opponent is definitely going to think twice about choosing because of her ability to remove those ice pillars to just ignore damage. And the fact that I've got two powerful healers in the crew already, there's just going to be a lot of things that are going to make it more difficult to score that last point.
She's got a lot of flexibility within her keyword to react to the pool. And I think that's going to prove to be a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I don't think she's going to be the style of master that's for everybody. But I think that if you do like control, if you like range, she's definitely going to be one that you can have a lot of fun with. There's just a lot of nuance to her. I'm a player who really, sometimes I like to go simple and just, beat face. I play Lady Justice. I enjoy that. But a lot of the time I really look for those masters in those crews where I have just a ton of options, because it's a game where you're going to be playing, especially in a competitive setting, you're going to play against strangers and you're going to come across things you've never seen before. You need to have answers for it, on the fly. So the more flexibility you have within the crew and within the synergy of the crew, the better off you're going to be. And that's why I like a master like Rasputina, because I'm taking some of that decision making away from her. The thing that I love about that Shockwave attack and Winter Strike is that if I've got a great hand, I might try and push through some Winter Strike, and get some blasts off on people. But if I've got, a middling hand, I'm going to just start dropping those shockwaves on my ice pillars that are not going to get removed and force the onus on my opponent's hand instead. And so,
yeah, she seems to have a kind of a nasty balance. And when I say nasty, I mean for the opponent, is she's got the mobility to be reactive, which is, to your point, important in this edition, but the ability to also impose her will with the control aspects. And a lot of times it's one or the other. It sounds to me like she's got a little bit and a lot of bit of both, depending on how you build that crew, which, again, to this, what we've been talking about with this defensive, defense being more and more important, your ability to react, your ability to impose your will is going to win you games.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I've seen it, throughout from closed beta to now, right before release. I've seen it. I've seen the evolution of that. And the masters that my meta, the player base that I have are winning the most with are those masters that have the most options available to them. Now, I think that almost every master has options, and it's about finding those. But there are several masters that I think are a little bit easier to pick up or have a lot of depth that you can really dive into. And those are the masters that I think have really been giving all of us, a tough time as we play them, but also being great for kind of reinvigorating our community as well, because we're trying to crack those codes.
Yeah, I think it's probably what we're finding here in North Carolina. We're stealing from the Warm Hordes player base. It sounds like you are a little bit too.
We definitely are.
And it's if you ask them like the two things, this is one of them. Where they're not giving up anything that they got from Warm Hordes, and they're gaining a lot that they didn't even realize they could have.
Yes,
that's very, very cool.
Well, and I think the thing that separates Malifaux beyond, I think, any other minis game is the fact that you build your list for each encounter. And I think that's something that a lot of our folks who came over from Warm Hordes and from 40K are really, really enjoying, is the fact that you can tailor your list to your opponents and the encounter. So you don't just have to have 2 or 3 all-comer lists that you have to account for everything. You can really, really tailor it. It still requires a certain knowledge about the game, but it also allows you to still play within your play style.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like we're bashing 40K and Warm Hordes. I mean, they're good games and, blah, blah, blah. But we're talking about Malifaux here. So, but I will say that compared to those two, a lot less games are won before models hit the board in Malifaux than in those two games.
Oh, absolutely.
And that gets to exactly what you're talking about, which is, hell, I build crews all the time, not knowing what the pool is, right? You goof around with different lists, or you'll create a random pool and, you'll build some lists around it. When I was playing 40K, it was an obsession. To min-max, and not in the derogative way, but just figure out that best way to handle anything.
And because the win conditions are very different.
Yep. No, it's very much so. And the impact of who your opponent is, I think, is even more different. That's really good stuff, Robert. So now we're going to take a break, but when we get back, we're going to reward all of those non-Arcanist players with some secret tech from you on how to potentially, hold your own against Raspi. So we'll be right back. Okay, without a doubt, Robert, the part of the show that I'm most excited about, because I hate Raspi and I hate Arcanists. So tell me what I need to know in case I face Jimmy again and he brings Raspi to the table.
All right, so the first thing that I will say, now this is a little unfortunate because you hate Arcanists, so you probably would never play as Arcanists. But they actually, Arcanists, some of the other models and other masters have some very good counters to Rasputina. Specifically, the Soulstone Miner and Willie actually have abilities that destroy destructible terrain. So there are other models across a couple other factions. Ten Thunders have Sadir Archibald. The Outcasts have Mad Dog Bracket. I'm sure there's several other models, but they have a bonus action called Blow It to Hell. And Blow It to Hell essentially it's a 8-inch range, so it's pretty substantial. stat 6, target number 10, so it's very easy to get off. And it's you drop a blown apart marker, which is just another 30 mil marker, anywhere within range. And then it removes any destructible terrain within pulse 2 of it. Models within aura 2 of that marker do not benefit from having cover at all, even if they, if there's another marker that's like still, so especially since it's height 4, if there's one a little bit further back. So they won't benefit from any of that cover. And that marker stays there as well. So it's a good way to, essentially, especially if I'm trying to manipulate cover for my models or run a screen or something like that. So it's a really good way to get rid of pillars that are there, but also discourage new pillars from popping up if I'm trying to use it for cover. I'm still going to be able to use that pillar if I drop it elsewhere for something else. But it is a good, really good way of getting rid of, a couple of pillars with a bonus action, so you're not wasting an action just destroying one and having to be within 1 inch of it. The Soulstone Miner also has a very powerful front of card ability that actually just allows it to destroy destructible terrain that's essentially right in front of it. And that one, I believe, does not even require an action. And it is called... What's it called? Demolitionist. Yeah. So at the start of the model's activation, it remove all destructible terrain within 1 inch. And the benefit of that as well is that if I drop an ice pillar marker in front of the Soulstone Miner and it hasn't gone yet, that player who has taken the Soulstone Miner, when it's their turn to activate, they choose the order of when things happen. So they can destroy that destructible terrain before they have to make that decision for slow or fast.
Oh, right. Right.
Exactly. So there are a couple little tricksy things. It also has a 3-inch tactical or 3-inch pulse tactical action called Thriller Driller, which is stat 6, target number 12, which is destroy all destructible terrain within range. So that essentially ends up being a 6-inch bubble from the center of that model that it's going to be able to destroy a ton of ice pillar markers, especially if you have it unbury somewhere and then do Thriller Driller. And I have had it happen to me. It is not fun. Usually the Soulstone Miner is one that I try and kill first if it's in, if I'm seeing it across the table. But it's not always easy because it's a very good model with a lot of defensive tech on it. Yeah.
And I would imagine, for, the likelihood of the ice golem, we've already talked about, the ability to have some anti-armor tech. Sounds good. It also sounds like the ability to maybe remove and strip suits might be helpful.
Yes.
Based off of the target numbers that you've been talking about and having the suits built in and a lot of them. Taking kind of a step back though, Robert, like generally speaking, is there a certain style or type of crew that is less than ideal for Raspy?
Card and hand manipulators.
Right. The card pressure.
Yeah. So Yuko is going to be a nightmare for Rasputina to have to deal with. Because she's already card starved, and Yuko is going to be forcing similar choices on me as the Rasputina player. Now, having played against Yuko a few times now, I do think that there are plenty of situations where you can just be like, okay, Yuko, take all the pass tokens you want. Because I want my cards. But it is you just have to know that you're going to have to brace for that as well, because there will be consequences from that. But somebody like Lucius, who's going to manipulate his own hand and try and manipulate yours, is going to be really tough to deal with as well. Hamlin, I find I have some trouble with Rasputina because the rats are so good at just completely negating the pillars. While he does enjoy rats for other things, and wants them for other actions, the fact that the insignificant model can just run up and remove the pillar because it's not an interact, really, really hurts. So, summoners who can do similar things as well, and especially if that summon is not, has an upgrade that gets attached that does not let them take interacts, they can still remove ice pillar markers. And so that's also something that's very important to keep in mind. So I also think that certain crews that are heavy on mobile melee damage dealers. So Lady Justice is still somebody that worries me as a Rasputina player, that even with me dropping several Ice Pillar markers right next to Rasputina, if Assassinate's in the pool, Lady Justice, if she really wants to, she's going to get over there and she's still probably going to kill Rasputina. More importantly, Lady Justice and some of those other types of guild type damage dealers, some of the outcast Nekama, are still going to be able to go and start hunting the minions that I rely upon very heavily. So getting those Ice Pillar markers out as the Rasputina player is going to be very important with those counters. And knowing that, because the more slow you can get out there, the less actions they're taking against your models.
That makes sense. I would also imagine, getting back to the hand pressure, that things, a lot of terror checks, a lot of manipulative and stuff like that, I would imagine would be a challenge.
Yeah, manipulative and terror are interesting because Rasputina herself is ruthless, so she is one of the ones that I use to kind of get around that a little bit. So if that's the case, right, then I will use her as my primary range damage dealer. Of course, the Ice Golem, he wants to smash face as much as possible. And so he's one of those that's just going to have to deal with it. Fortunately, even though defense is bad, his willpower is still a 5. And so there are different things. Now, the one thing I will say is that if you, as a Rasputina player, and really this goes across the board for third ed, is that if you're worried about things like manipulative or distracted, and you're not sure what to do, especially on turn 1, but even turn 2, if you don't necessarily have a target in range yet to attack, or somebody that you need to a model that you need to interact with, or you can't quite get to where you need to drop a scheme marker, really consider taking that concentrate action.
Yep.
Because the buildup of focus, I found in pretty much all of my 3rd edition games, has really made the difference, especially in a lot of my victories have really been because I was able to build up focus either through taking concentrate over the course of multiple turns, ever since they made the change of how concentrate works, or having extra other models who can throw out focus onto your individual models once they've already taken concentrate. That focus action can really help you get through a lot. It can help you get through distracted and then give you a positive to that damage flip.
Yep.
It can help you get through that manipulative. It can help you pass that willpower check that you really, really, really need to worry about because of a Zoraida with all of her obeys and things like that. Or that terror check and things like, well, not the terror check because that's not opposed, but similar idea of like a lot of those things that you really, really have to be concerned about so that you can start preserving at least some of your cards in hand because it's going to matter later on.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, Robert, it was a pleasure, my friend. I really appreciate really how much you shared with us and the level of detail that you gave us. You've sold me on hating her, so congrats to that. And I'm going to have to talk you into coming back because I think not only did I enjoy this, but I'm sure our listeners did as well. So I do appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
All right. Everybody take care. Thanks for listening. Be sure to rate and write a review on this podcast so we can find more people almost as cool as you are. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching for Third Floor Wars. That's THIRD. We'll catch you next time on the Third Floor.